We'll call the meeting to order. Would like to welcome everyone to the special board meeting, public hearing. It's Tuesday, January 16, 5:30. Ms. Schottky is going to play the role of board secretary because Ms. Grant has lost her voice. So thank you for stepping in.
Absolutely. So Dr. Flores excused? We expect?
I know, I'm expecting him, so, but.
All right, very good.
Maybe not.
Ms. Grant? Yes,
Present.
you're here.
Yes.
All right, Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
Reverend Matias is not here yet. Mr. Ross is excused. Ms. Schottky here. Ms. Slade?
Present.
Dr. Baker?
Here.
And President Faub.
Present, thank you. So we have a special order of business regarding the proposed establishment of the Promise Zone.
Dr. Faub and members of the board, I would like to ask for this on. I would like to ask Dr. Faub to come forward, please.
Good evening.
Good evening.
President Fall, members of the board, Superintendent Weatherall Neal. I'm here to provide an overview of the Promise Zone opportunity. The Promise Zone legislation that was actually enacted in 2009 allowed for the creation of up to 10 Promise Zones by Michigan school districts, ISDs, cities, townships, and counties, providing they have an above-average poverty rate for families with children under 18. There was a push to expand that just recently, and in November of 2017, the legislature approved and the governor signed legislation that provided for the creation of 5 new zones. And that's really what's led us to where we are today, is that we are going through the process to position Grand Rapids Public Schools, and really, this is all high school graduates, public and private, that live and reside within the city of Grand Rapids that could benefit from this opportunity. These Promise Zone designations are awarded to eligible communities on a first-come, first-served basis, which is why we moved very quickly. As we do know, there are 10 zones currently. There are 4 districts or municipalities that are on a waiting list. So there could potentially be only 1 zone. However, we've been told that that some of the others may not seek this opportunity. And so this is part of the process. The legislation very clearly specifies that we must do public notices in 2 newspaper advertisements and 20 public locations 20 days in advance of the public hearing. That's where we are today. The way that this works is if following this hearing, the Board of Education votes to adopt a resolution. That resolution serves as the application to the Michigan Department of Treasury. Once the Michigan Department of Treasury has received that, they then would essentially notify us that we have been designated one of the Promise Zones. At that point, the superintendent moves to appoint the Promise Zone Authority. This is an 11-member authority. 9 of those are appointments by the superintendent. 2 are by, one by the Senate Majority Leader and 1 by the Speaker of the House. That group would then take time to put together the Promise Zone Development Plan. That development plan is the nuts and bolts. Those are the specifics of everything and how we may approach this between a 2-year or up to 4-year scholarship to public and private universities and colleges in the state of Michigan. So tonight, this is the beginning of a process. There will be plenty of dialogue and opportunity for us to engage with local stakeholders to make sure we have a local plan, one that we know is sustainable, one that we know is going to be able to provide opportunities for the most number of kids. This is something I know Larry Oberst, our CFO, has run the numbers, but essentially how this works is there is an opportunity here with a Promise Zone to capture the a portion of the growth in the state education tax capture. That growth obviously is at a time where Grand Rapids is seeing substantial property tax growth and property tax value increase. And so we anticipate that capture, which is 0.5 of the growth in the state education tax, could provide a substantial amount of funds over a period of time. We would, however, have to raise locally or in other means the first 3 years of scholarships before the tax capture dollars kick in. The law is very clear that the local entity has to essentially prove that it can cover those initial scholarships and demonstrate that there will be local fundraising ability to essentially help to match or be part of the overall capture. The state education tax capture will not cover 100% of this, depending on which approach we take, from a 2-year to a 2-year or 2-year equivalent, or 2-year up to 4-year. And so that's something that the Promise Zone Authority will have time to determine as part of the final plan that will be submitted to the Department of Treasury. The Promise Zone scholarships must provide all resident graduates of high schools a minimum of a tuition-free path to an associate degree in at least one Michigan higher education institution. These are for public, charter, and private schools. So this is any high school graduate that reside in the city of Grand Rapids. Scholarships can go beyond the required minimum cost for tuition and fees for obtaining an associate up to a bachelor degree. And that's really the summary.
Questions from the board? Dr. Baker?
Yeah, I got a few. What is the role of the public school district, given that it's not, like, we're the ones applying for the zone, but all students that go to all of the other schools are also then a part of it, as opposed to, say, the city applying for it?
Sure. In this case, I mean, there are multiple entities that could have been the qualifying applicants. School district is one of them, City of Grand Rapids, the county, the ISD, and townships. In this case, we chose the school district to do this. And this would then give the superintendent the appointment authority. But once this board has voted to pass the resolution, that triggers the creation of the Promise Zone Authority. The Promise Zone Authority is very similar to like a DDA or like a tax increment financing authority, in the sense that they have tax capture powers, and that 11-member authority would be making decisions around this. Obviously, you appoint the superintendent, and right now, having not received any additional consultation, we'd have to check with a consultant or legal counsel to find out what, if additional role the school board would play. And I would look to my boss if she has more on that. But I believe this authority would ultimately make those decisions. But that authority would likely, it also says that the authority itself, no more than 3 of the PZA members may be public officials, and 1 of them must represent the public education community. So there are some limitations on the appointments of who will serve on there. But typically, if you look at what other entities have done, it's usually representatives from the local education, both public and private institutions. Some cases, it's the community college, philanthropic community, all of it. It varies based on the 10 different designations, but you can imagine it would be a very carefully thought out appointment process.
So we would expect then other entities to assist in raising this, matching funds, et cetera. So all the private schools, the charter schools, et cetera, would be benefiting and participating?
Yes, it would be a community initiative.
Okay. Also, it's specifically designated to go towards an associate's degree and perhaps more, or 2 years of school?
A minimum of an associate degree is what the law states, or a 2-year equivalent up to 4 years.
So it could be designated to go specifically to a 4-year. It doesn't have to have an associate's degree, compared to, say, tuition incentive program.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
And my understanding also is that the philanthropic dollars can be used differently than what's required for the state dollars. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Yes. So you could bring people on to help prepare students, so a reading instructor or something like that, so.
Well, I was just concerned about the restrictions compared to TIP. which, expect an associate's degree out of it. And so therefore you can only use it at places that offer associate's degrees, so other four-year institutions, but this could be used for those
To a
four-year
four-year.
degrees without an expectation of an
And
associate's.
that's something the Promise Zone Authority will be able to develop those, that, if, it's gotta be a minimum associate, but that even taking the equivalent to an associate and what that tuition would be and how that could be used at a public or private institution like Grand Valley or Michigan State. Each of the zones that are authorized have done it a little differently, but most of them have done the associate degree equivalent.
Nothing against the associate degree granting institution that's located here in the city, but just wondered about it. So I do worry that we're, when we are only giving two-year degrees, that we're limiting or steering students to community college and not towards four-year institutions as well.
Totally agree, Dr. Baker.
So in other words, kids who choose, like, to go to Northview or Forest Hills, as long as they live in the city of Grand Rapids, they would be eligible for this?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. There are eligibility, being a resident in the city is a key factor, but if they go to a school that is outside of the district, that's an eligibility criteria that the zone could choose not to
That's
authorize.
But what you're saying then is the schools that, like Catholic Central, West Catholic, Christian, those kids, or the charter schools that are within the
Correct.
school district?
If the individual student resides in the city.
Yes, yes, okay.
And then does the authority then decide how long that residency needs to be, or?
One of
correct.
several different factors that they can take into account.
And this authority will be made up of at least one of the school board members, or not
Not
necessarily?
necessarily.
It's 9 appointees by the superintendent, no more than 3 may be public officials, and at least 1 must be a public education official.
And that would be your superintendent, as your public educational official.
Questions? Can you, you probably did it in your presentation, but could you give me review the timeline again from, if the board adopts it tonight to, how that goes? The
Once the
timeline?
Board of Ed, if the Board of Ed approves, then we wait 30 days to submit it to the state, Michigan Department of Treasury. Michigan Department of Treasury is going to review it. It's not a long process. They are going to just make sure that we followed the letter of the law on the public notification, the public hearing process. They're going to then go back to say how many are on the waiting list and determine whether or not there's a slot for us. Then they would notify us whether it's approved or not. Once it's approved, then it kicks in the creation of the Smart Zone Authority and the appointment process. Once the appointments have been fulfilled, that group then meets and begins the whole formal process of the bylaws and appointment of officers, and eventually their work would be to develop and submit the Promise Zone Development Plan to the state. And that's where all the details are. We're still up 100,000 feet in the air on this. The Promise Zone Authority is what's going to really get to the specifics of how we implement.
So the legislation was developed such that it was like first come, first serve. So
Correct.
there's kind of a queue. Is there that initial waiting period, once it's adopted in the 30 days, then is there a wait period on that queue, or what is that, do you know how that
So
works?
there are four entities that are currently on an existing waiting list. We don't know if all 4 of them are interested, and there's at least 1 open slot. And so it's really, at this point, we're going to continue to monitor who's applying for it, and we'll know shortly, but by you having this hearing, we've triggered our clock. So we are, at least right now, we know Mason County is one that is ahead of us that we're aware of. But we're optimistic that that one of those 4 may not apply, and that we could be eligible for one of these.
One more question, maybe you don't know the answer to this, but is there a deadline for those that have started the initial process in which that they have to commit? So those 4 entities, and
I'm
Mason
aware of.
County, or even ourselves. I mean,
They're
they
following.
can be on there.
They have to follow the same timeline. If they're already on the wait list, they're on the wait list.
Okay.
Okay, and at that point, I believe that they are going to be asked, are you planning to maintain this or not?
They have to do a yes or no at that.
That's my understanding.
How long do you think this would take? How long did it take for the other schools to? Up and running.
We've been advised that once we submit the application, which is your board resolution, to Treasury, that it can be a very quick turnaround for when they say you are an officially designated promise zone.
And then at that point, the nitty-gritty comes from this committee.
Correct. At that point, superintendent
Alrighty.
appoints it, they come together. That's where they're going to dive in really deep to say,
The feasibility.
what's the true cost of this? I mean, Larry Oberst has already run the numbers of what a potential capture could be over the next 20 years, and it's substantial. I mean, we're in the tens of millions of dollars based on some of it conservative growth in the tax capture over a period of time. It's substantial. But then we also have to account for how many graduates are we projecting, how many graduates is Christian, Catholic, Wellspring, others that are out there. And so that's where we'll really get in deep on the numbers and projected costs.
Do you know how long it took the 10 that are there are 10 that are doing it now, have already been accepted and are in the process of doing this, or they are in the process of developing their own?
So the 10 that are already formed, I don't know. I think each one was different. I think some took as many as 3 years before they finally submitted their Promise Zone development plan and began capturing the tax dollars.
So once we're approved, that's the next step, this,
That's right.
Is there opportunity, once the development, Promise Zone Development Authority has been established, for them to then, based on whatever information, back out of it? Is that?
Yes,
Yeah, okay,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a
And that's
lot of
why
the deep questions
Yeah, that's
can
why
be
we
asked
want to
at that point.
emphasize
Yeah.
is this is the beginning of a process that's to position us to have this opportunity for all city resident students. From that, once we are secure, at least if we can secure that, then we as a local community need to determine, is this what we want? Is it feasible? If we do it, what are the different approaches we take? Is it 2-year? Is it 2-year or equivalent? Is it 2-year and up to 4-year based on certain criteria? And then we have lots of time to take to make sure that we do it right based on what our local community wants.
so in the 30 days, then after the 30 days, we get accepted, and then at that point, Ms. Weatherall starts to appoint this committee, and then the committee really comes up with how much time they're going to take before this, and you would be asking people from philanthropic groups, neighborhood groups, church.
Higher education and
This is a question from Ms. Grant, who is voiceless. She is wondering if we made the decision not to adopt at this time, whether there'd be a chance to do so at the later date. Maybe answer that first, and I'll ask
Sure.
the
I mean,
second
the
question.
response is, if you did that, then you jeopardize us not necessarily being in line for the first come, first served slots. So there's zero risk to you approving it tonight. There is a longer term risk if we wait a month or 2 months or 3 months.
Oh, okay. So if the authority wants to slow the process or doesn't want to jump in within the next year, do they have time to
Yes.
do it at a later date?
They can
That's what
take
you're
as,
asking.
frankly, they can take as much time as they want.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
That
the
was your
one
question.
entity took 3 years before they finally landed on how they were going to implement.
Sorry, your second question. Like- Oh, yeah.
Television.
Yeah, if they start initially with the parameters on just granting, scholarships to an associate's degree, and then they decide later to change it to 4-year granting institutions, can they make that decision after their initial plan?
I'm not sure I
Put it in-
could, yeah, I think they would have to resubmit a new
Resubmit.
development plan based on that knowledge. I do believe they can.
Yeah.
you can.
But
But you have to resubmit
But you'll have to resubmit your plan based on that new approach.
Does the authority meet under the Open Meetings Act? Is that a public body?
That,
It is?
yes, when they
Yeah,
get,
okay.
the 11, when they meet, it is
So
public.
that also gives lots of opportunity for community input. Yeah. Other questions for John or Lisa or Teresa or? Okay, we have public comments. Do we have public comment from anybody?
All right. I'm going to invite by first name if that's all right. So Eric, John, would you please come up and then ask for your grace on the last name? Oh, this is a non-agenda
That's not-
item. Oh,
Yeah, that's
okay.
not for this.
This is the public hearing, not.
Oh, this is for the public hearing.
Not
You
the
want
board
make
meeting.
Board of Ed, regular meeting comment?
It's a board member.
Okay,
Oh,
that'll be,
okay, very good. I'm sorry, I missed that.
stay tuned. Stay tuned.
6:30,
Yeah, that meeting doesn't start till 6:30.
Yeah.
so it's a separate meeting.
Seeing no public comment, I guess this special hearing is adjourned. Stick around for the next show.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, meeting adjourned.